Good evening. Good evening. Thank you, Mike. Good evening. I'm John Mika, the president of Founding Forward, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to tonight's program in beautiful UL National. What a great place. We're thrilled to be here. This is our second time Founding Forward has had an event in the last week. Last Monday, we had our annual golf outing, the UL Classic, and raised over $500,000 for the work of Founding Forward. And we need all the money we can get because our work is expanding, and it's expanding rapidly. We just concluded our programming summer for our student programs with 70-some students from across the country last week in a public policy program for high school students. And nearly 700 teachers will go through our programs this year. That's over 100% increase from last year. All this is vitally important, and all of it happens because of your generosity. So I thank you for your contributions. If you haven't yet contributed, don't worry, you'll get an email from Kristen Moran tomorrow morning, and please, please be generous. We will use your generosity wisely. A couple of housekeeping pieces for tonight. First of all, if you would take a moment to silence your cell phones. Thank you. We will have Q&A. We are going to record the program tonight, so we're going to ask that you use the microphones so that we can hear you. I know it isn't needed in this room necessarily, but please use the microphones. And as always, we're looking for a couple of sentences, and at the end of that, you've got to be able to put a question mark on it, okay? We're looking for questions for Mr. Mundy. So upcoming programs, we have several great programs in the next few weeks and months. We have a library hour on September 11th, Jefferson Adams and the Lost Art of Civic Friendship with Jane Kamensky. And we have a library hour at the Valley Forge campus, Do We Still Like Ike? Eisenhower's Legacy with Ron Graneri. And then on October 7th, Public Affairs China, Rise of a Superpower with Raina Mitter. That's at the Union League of Philadelphia. So all of this and all of our programs, we thank you for your generosity that makes it happen. What else makes it happen is leadership, the leadership of our great Union League and Founding Forward family. And I want to acknowledge a couple of those leaders today. First of all, a member of the Founding Forward Board and the 74th President of the Union League of Philadelphia, Mr. Robert Cavalier. And the 70th President and the Chair of Founding Forward, Mr. Jim Dunnigan. And finally, to introduce our program tonight, a member of the Founding Forward Board, and most importantly, the Chair of our Development Committee, as someone that is known to, I'm sure, many of you, a great civic leader in Philadelphia. Please welcome Mr. Dan Fitzpatrick. Oh, Dan.
John, thank you so much, and it's great to be here. The Phillies are on the road. This is really nice, so, and they're on a winning streak. But no, thank you, and do want to thank our Union League President Bob Cavalier being here, because what we're doing, expanding in Avalon, and what we're doing down here is so exciting, such a great opportunity. But this is what it's all about. It's about the mission. Why was the Union League formed? And that's the beauty of tonight's program. And most importantly, thank you for being here. This is what the Union League is all about. So again, it really is my privilege to introduce this program. And again, in the 163-year history of the Union League of Philadelphia, there are many historic figures. Great patriotic men and women who helped save the Union and were civic and business leaders. Along the way, these great patriots built the greatest city club. Well, no, I think the greatest club in the world, which you should all get a pub, because this is amazing what the Union League does and what's built here in Philadelphia and around the amenities, but again, still mission-driven in the critical mission that this is all about. So our speaker tonight, Jim Mundy, was witness to nearly one-third of that history. Jim began at the League in 1978 as an associate archivist, and for the next 45 years, Jim held a wide variety of positions, including librarian, curator, activities manager, membership director, house manager, and director of historical collections, and as a member of the Founding Forward staff, historian. Just an amazing job that what Jim has done in building kind of like the heart and soul of the Union League and our true history. And as a maker of history here at the League, and one who chronicles and shares that history, Jim is perhaps one of the most enduring figures of the League over the past 5 decades. He is both a maker of history and a true historian. So Jim retired, and we're using that term very, very loosely. As you see, he's here tonight from the League in December of 23 and currently holds the title of Historian Emeritus. So please give a really warm welcome to a great Civil War expert in Jim Mundy. Jim, thank you.
Dan, thank you very much. John, thank you very much. And thank all of you for being here. I don't get to the shore that often, so I'm going like, why are you here on such a beautiful night? I'd be on the beach with, at least a bottle of gin and some tonic and everything else I could pack in a cooler. But so thank you all for being out this evening. It is both humbling and flattering at the same time. So for those of you who know me, and I hope most of you do, if you've heard me before, you know that, my approach to history is that nothing happens in a vacuum. There's context to everything, and that history is just not linear. I mean, history takes place in parallel universes all the time. That is, even while we're sitting here, something's happening all over the world, and it was the same way in the 19th century, and the events that led up to the Civil War itself. And so tonight, we're going to go back in time into the 18th century, start there, because that's really when the issues evolved that led to the need to create a Union League of Philadelphia in December of 1862. Plus, it's just kind of fun to talk about our fair city. And I'm born and bred in Philadelphia, and I'm going to be buried in Philadelphia. So to me, Philadelphia history is what I'm all about. And even on top of that, then, of course, the Union League itself, because it's Union League and Philadelphia history go hand in hand. So on that note, let's get started. So I have a gatekeeper tonight. So John is going to make sure. I have the habit, if you haven't noticed, of talking too much and trying to fit too much in and cram too much in. So hopefully John will be keeping me moving throughout all of this, and we'll see how well that works. So, Mr. Miko, if you're ready. All right, we're starting with the city itself. Don't know how many of you actually know, but there was the city and then there was the county. So the city itself went from, anybody? Pop quiz? Went from river to river and then from Vine to South. That was the city, roughly 2 square miles. The other 128 was the county of Philadelphia. And as Philadelphia would evolve politically, especially after the Revolution and when the government was here, the city became the Federalist city, and the county became the Jeffersonian county. So you automatically have this conflict from the very beginning of Philadelphia's history, if you will. It's more sophisticated history, where obviously, so the Hamiltonians were, what did they become? Anyway, the Hamiltonians became the ones who believed in central government, a strong central government that could issue money, borrow money, centralized banking that would drive economic development, commerce, manufacturing eventually. They also believed that it was the federal government's responsibility to pay for internal improvements, as they called them. So roads, canals, and railroads specifically, all right? They believed in free public education. So you can see where Hamilton and the Federalists were going. The Jeffersonians, Thomas Jefferson, believed in a yeoman farmer base of the country itself. So it was an agrarian country, and the farmers are the ones who really should be the ones to determine what it would do. So it's a very decentralized form of government, if you will. And so I really want to hear what the next library hour is about between Adams and, because they were anything but civil to each other in real life. So it's going to be really interesting to see how that evolves. But nonetheless, though, so here we are. So that's the city. So already we have conflict evolving already in the 1790s in the city of Philadelphia. Okay? All right, here we go. Who would have thought that Philadelphia had slave owners? William Penn, the holy experiment, no king, no cross. Everybody thinks that because Philadelphia was a Quaker city and the city named the city of brotherly love, that we wouldn't have slaves in Philadelphia and that we wouldn't have slave owners in Philadelphia, but it was just the opposite indeed. And you can see, so every dot you see is a slave owner in Philadelphia, okay? That's a lot of dots, all right? Make the point? Great, okay. Pierce Butler, 6th son of an Anglo-Irish baronet from County Cavan in Ireland, 29th Lightfoot English Army, Obviously, his father bought him a military commission because that's what the six sons did. He's at the Battle of Boston, 1770. In 1771, he would marry Mary Middleton, whose father and grandfather were the wealthiest plantation slave owners in the country, and slave owners in the country. Think of Middleton Plantation in Virginia, which still exists. He would marry Mary Middleton in 1771. In 1773, before the war even begins, he would sell his commission and he would buy his own plantation in Butler Island on the Darien River, Altamaha River estuary in Georgia. So, John, next slide, please. All right, and you can see, I don't know if you can see that well enough, but all right, everyone knows where Jekyll Island is, right? So this is just north of Jekyll Island. These are the two main islands just north of there, to put that in perspective. To Butler Island, rice and tobacco, not cotton, all right? And that's where Major Butler, as he would be known, would make his living. And that. So Major Butler during the war, no, that's right, became a major in the South Carolina militia. That's hence the major. After the war, he became South Carolina's sole senator to the U.S. Senate. In 1787, John, he became South Carolina's only representative to the Constitutional Convention, and he single-handedly was responsible for inserting and maintaining what was known as the Fugitive Slave Clause, which makes sense. I mean, at this point, well, his wife dies in 1795. He now inherits those estates, because of course she couldn't, and he becomes one of the wealthiest men in the country and one of the largest slave owners and plantation owners, all right? And so it shouldn't be a surprise that he's the one who inserted the Fugitive Slave Clause in the U.S. Constitution in 1787, all right? He would move to Philadelphia into a summer house in 1805. It's so incongruous that anybody would move to Philadelphia to be there in the summertime. It makes no sense at all. But again, if you're coming from South Carolina, I guess it did make sense. And John, next slide, please. This was his house on Chestnut between 8th and 9th, one of the largest houses in Philadelphia. It was known as the Butler House. It was regretfully long since torn down. And then on John, next slide, please, you'll see he is buried at Christ Church with his family. So his family is there, and also his grandson's family, because his grandson, we'll hear about him in 1859, who became Pierce Butler himself, is also buried there. So we'll get to that story when that happens. So here we have one of the country's largest slave owners, not living in the South, well before the Civil War, but living in Philadelphia. He's a Philadelphian, okay? Anybody know that before? Is that news to anybody? Okay, so you can see where this is kind of going, right? Because what's the Civil War all about? Slavery. So we'll see what happens. All right, next slide, please, John. If I'm going too fast or I'm talking too fast, let me know. All right. Beginning in 1795, there was an abolition society in Philadelphia, and it evolved into the Pennsylvania Anti-Slavery Society in 1838, and this is their executive committee. You should recognize one person here automatically. Front row, second from the right. Anybody recognize? Thank you. So you do look at the paintings in the League House. Thank you, thank you, thank you. That made my day right there. That's all that counts. And that is her husband to the right. But then if you go into the back row, second from the left, is Edward M. Davis, who was their son-in-law. And he's going to play a role pretty soon. And then back row, far right, J. Miller McKim would become a founding member of the Union League. And Miller McKim was one of the foremost abolitionists, not just in Philadelphia, but in the country. So when John Brown was hung in Virginia in 1859, Miller McKim, who was a personal friend of John Brown's, to show you something about McKim's abolitionism, McKim went with Mrs. Brown to Virginia to escort the body back to New York and things like that. So that's how deeply McKim was tied into the abolition movement in Philadelphia. So you can see how we're having these different parallel universes that exist all at the same time again, right? Okay. Next slide, please, John. All right, 1838. Pennsylvania Hall was built by the Abolition Society, and they had exactly one event in it before a mob came along and literally burned it down to the ground. It didn't last a week, all right? So gives you a different impression of Philadelphia, all right? So where is the city of brotherly love? Where is William Penn's green country town, okay? All right? Did the dots connect well enough so far? Okay, all right, next slide, please, John. And it wasn't just the abolitionists that got in the firing range, so to speak. So, and this is pre-famine, this is pre-Irish famine. That was 1845 to 1851. So this is 1844, but there were still enough Irish Catholics in the city that who were, and they of course were attending, there is no parochial school system per se yet, so they're attending public schools. But they're being made to read and study the King James Bible, which is in the Church of England, Henry VIII. And so the Catholic Archbishop, William Kendrick, asked if it would be okay if these Catholic kids could read the Douay Bible, which is the official Catholic Bible. And the result was that basically no. And here's the ride of 1844. 2 Catholic churches were burned, 15 people were killed, and so so you can see this is, so Philadelphia was a violent city. And obviously, with many different things, different parallels going on at the same time. So there you go with that. All right, so John, please. All right, we're going to have 2 brothers here, Joseph Reed Ingersoll and Charles Jared Ingersoll. Everybody knows the name Ingersoll from Philadelphia, right? Think of Ingersoll Rand, for instance, things like that, okay? And this is to show you how families were split, not just cities. So Joseph Reed was and at this point, he was a Whig representative to Congress, 1841 to 1849. He would become a founding member of the Union League. Civil Wars of Folly and Secession. I mean, he was completely against secession. His brother, Charles Jared, who's in the next slide, was just the opposite. He was the Democratic member of the family, also served in Congress from 1841 to 1849. His son married Mary Brown from New Orleans. Another one of his sons was a plantation owner in Louisiana. And yet, ironically, his daughter Anne married John Forsyth Meigs, who was a founding member of the Union League, and in whose house, on December 27th of 1862, the Union League would officially be formalized, be organized. So here you have one of the most, I was about to say obnoxious, but that's not the adjective. I need a better adjective than that. Here's one of the most strident secessionists, one of the most strident believers in slavery, and yet his daughter marries into a Union League family. And this is what's going on in Philadelphia in the 1840s and the 1850s, all right? Okay, still making sense here? Yes. Okay, all right. Next slide, please. I'll read this because this is, just in case. And this is 1841, the year that both of the Ingersoll brothers entered Congress. In 1841, the visiting English Quaker Joseph Sturge wrote of Philadelphia, quote, "There is probably no city in the known world where dislike, amounting to hatred of the colored population, prevails more than in the city of brotherly love." All right, underneath, 1848, the slave-turned-abolitionist Frederick Douglass wrote that Philadelphia, quote, "more than any city in our land holds the destiny of the people." Douglass actually believed that if abolitionism had a future, and if it was going to work, it would start in Philadelphia, okay? So even Douglass is buying into the city of brotherly love, I think, that William Penn proposed back in the 1680s. So, all right, next slide, please, John. So at this point, we have the Act of Consolidation in February of 1854. So now the city and the county are merged into one political body itself, all right? But that doesn't mean that the divisions still don't exist, right? They're going to, all right. So you can kind of see where the old, you know where Philadelphia City was, you know where the county, you can see how big Philadelphia became at that point in time. So again, it's industrializing. Philadelphia at this point is the major industrial city in the country. It's the world's largest textile manufacturing city, okay? It has a southern-based economy because all that product to make textiles is coming from the south, as well as lumber, turpentine, things like that, that all get turned into finished products that then get sold in the open markets, either in this country or shipped to Europe, as a matter of fact. So Philadelphia has an economic relationship with the South, which means if you have an economic relationship, you're bound to have a political one as well, because people voted with their wallets in the 19th century just the way they do in the 21st. Nothing new to that. All right? Okay, John, next slide, please. All right. 1854, the year of consolidation. Color phobia is more rampant here, Philadelphia, than in the pro-slavery, Negro-hating city of New York. William Wells Brown, an African-American abolitionist. Okay. Pete, and repeat. All right, so there is a theme here. This is the fun slide. To me, this is, it kind of got skewed. All right. Okay, 1856 presidential election. There are three parties running. Obviously, a Democrat, a Republican, and then the man in the middle, Miller Fillmore. So what does the N behind his name stand for in terms of his political affiliation? Well, no, that would be a K, but Babs, you're right. But I'm just kidding you, Babs. But you're right. It was the Nativist Party. There was something called the American Nativist Party. It was strongest in Philadelphia. To be a member of the party, you had to be white, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant male, native born. Okay? That limits it pretty well, doesn't it? Okay? All right? And again, now to Babs's point, though, they were still considered a bit of a secret party. So if somebody approached you on the street and they asked you what party do you belong to, or did you belong to this American Nativist Party, and your response was, I know nothing. So they became known as the Know Nothings. So Babs, thanks for bringing that up. So here we are. Here's Philadelphia, okay? 1856. James Buchanan, the Democrat, who would win the election, got 45% of the vote nationally, 50% in Pennsylvania, and 56% in Philadelphia, because the Democrats were the party of the South. They were the ones who were promoting slavery. They were the ones who believed that only white society was a legitimate society. John Fremont, the Republican. This is the first time Republicans ran in a national election. He got 33% of the vote nationally, which is pretty good showing for the first time. 32% in Pennsylvania, but only 11% in Philadelphia. So something's going on, isn't it? So here's Miller Fillmore, who had already been American president, because he was Zachary Taylor's vice president. He got 22% of the vote nationally, but 34% in Pennsylvania. No, I'm sorry, 22% nationally, 18% in Pennsylvania, but 34% in Philadelphia. So the two parties who were promoting slavery, let's see, they don't like immigrants, they don't like Irish Catholics, they don't like Jews, okay? And so what does it tell you about Philadelphia in 1856 that 89% of the population voted for those two parties alone, okay? Pretty interesting, isn't it? I mean, I find it fascinating myself. So John, the next slide. This is called a political campaign handkerchief. They literally used cloth handkerchiefs during presidential campaigns, kind of the way we use everything else, if you will. So this is actually an American flag printed, and can you read it? It says, Native Americans beware of foreign influence. All right? So you can see where this is all trending. And it's going to lead exactly where you think it's going to lead. So actually, before that, though, 1859, we heard about the Butler family earlier. So Major Butler's, all right, so he had only one son, but his son married a French Catholic. He got excommunicated from the family. He's gone. He's out. So his sister, though, marries a doctor from Philadelphia. And she would have 8 children, 2 grandsons, 2 sons who survived. They would become the 2 grandsons who inherit their grandfather's estates when he dies in 1822, on the condition that they change their name from Meese, M-E-A-S-E, which was their surname, to Butler. And you can imagine it didn't take long to think about that decision, right? Okay. And actually, but that's not uncommon. If you look at the English aristocracy, they do it all the time. So that's nothing new to that. But of the 2, young Pierce Butler Meese would survive his brother John. And Pierce Meese Butler, though, now is running the show. He had married Fanny Kemble, an English Shakespearean actress, in 1834. When the 2 of them were dating, she never thought to say, so Pierce, tell me, where'd you get your money? You seem to have a lot of it. And he never seemed to ask her, like, so honey, would it surprise you if I'm a slave owner and I own quite a few plantations, and would you object to that? Because she was an ardent abolitionist. And in 1838, she and their family visited the plantations on Butler Island, and it eventually would lead to their divorce in 1849. So Pierce Butler himself, though, is still running the estates, not doing a good job of it. You know, they always say the 3rd generation in a family is the hardest one to keep the family business going, so to speak. So young Pierce basically failed horribly. He was a gambler, a womanizer, he was a drinker, and his debts became so great that trustees were formed, and they took the operation of the plantations away from him. And the only way to pay his debts, though, was to have a slave auction. And up until 2 years ago, this was the largest slave auction in American history. It took place on March the 2nd and 3rd at the Ten Brook Racetrack outside of Savannah, Georgia, known as the Great Weeping. So John, next slide, please. And you can see, so for sale. So again, long cotton rice, Negroes. Eventually, 436 slaves were sold, mostly families, for better or for worse. And with that, Pierce Butler's debts were wiped out. In $25, they were just over $1 million, okay, to take care of his debts. So this is all going on, and so this is Philadelphia at this time. All right. Next slide, please. 1860 election. Big difference. All right. There are 4 candidates running, including Abraham Lincoln. Now, to show you how quickly things can change, we just saw what happened in 1856. In 1860, Abraham Lincoln, in a 4-man race, got 52% of the vote in Philadelphia. So something's going on, okay? Something's really, really going on. And what is it, okay? So people are beginning to get these political epiphanies, I think, and we'll see one that directly involves the Union League itself in just a minute or two. So next slide, please, John. All right, so, Abraham Lincoln was elected. The election was November the 4th of 1860. Within less than a month, South Carolina already secedes, and that began the domino effect that would lead to 11 southern states eventually seceding from the United States itself. The war would begin, the bombardment of Fort Sumter that you see here in Charleston Harbor, April the 12th of 1861, and that was the match, if you will, that lit the keg of the Civil War itself. So that's April the 12th, all right? Next slide, please. There's already a newspaper in Philadelphia called the Palmetto Flag, and so what is the state symbol of South Carolina? The palmetto. Oh, what a coincidence. So here we have a flag, a newspaper called the Palmetto Flag, and this is volume 1, 3rd paper. And this is dated April the 13th. So this paper is already in publication, and as you can imagine, it's a pro-Confederate, pro-slavery newspaper being published at 337 Chestnut Street, right in the heart of Philadelphia itself. Now, once the war began, there would be a tide, a backlash, if you will, against the Palmetto Flag itself, and within a month it was out of business. But the fact that it was there even before the war began, again, tells us something about the city, what's going on in it. Okay, John, next slide, please. All right, and this is only 2 days after the Civil War begins. April 14th, 1861, the Sunday Dispatch noted that in a single block of Walnut Street, 22 Southern families occupied palatial residences. I mean, Southerners came to Philadelphia. And if you go back to the beginning of the 19th century, there was the whole block on Spruce Street between 9th and 10th was called Carolina Row because almost every family was from one of the 2 Carolinas. And that goes back to 1800. So you can see how slowly but surely this Southern presence is building up in the city of Philadelphia itself. All right, just to that point in the Civil War itself. So here we are. Here are our 2 heroes of the story, if you will. George Henry Boker on the left and John Ennis Clark Hare on the right. George Henry Boker, fascinating fellow. They were Huguenot immigrants to Philadelphia from France. His father, Charles Boker, became the manager for, not surprisingly since they were French, for the estate of, John, help me out. I'm having my first senior moment of the night. I'm surprised it took this long to be perfectly, no, don't tell. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. Come on. Don't tell me. Thank you. Stephen Girard. I apologize. And of course, Stephen Girard was French. So not surprisingly that he chose a French family and a French man to become the manager of his estates. And of course, when Girard died, 1812-ish, his estate was worth $7 million then, and it would be worth about 2.1 today. so the wealthiest man in the country. And Boker's father was running that estate. So Boker grew up as a young, privileged man. He would go to Princeton University, which is where proper Philadelphia sent its sons, not to the University of Pennsylvania, all right? They went to Princeton instead. He would graduate Princeton. He graduated and read for the bar because his father wanted him to be a lawyer, but his heart was really in literature, and he would eventually become the country's leading poet, author, and playwright. So, and that's Boker. Now, Boker was very interesting. He joined the Philadelphia Club. Everybody know the Philadelphia Club? 1834, it's northwest corner, 13th and Walnut. It was the club of Philadelphia's hereditary aristocracy, since we don't have royalty, but we did have hereditary families, and so that was the club of them. And old Philadelphia, as it was very much pro-Southern, because many of those families owned plantations in Louisiana as well, and places like that. So the Philadelphia Club is an interesting place. So George became a member right out of college. He would eventually be on the board. But Boker's like those 52% of the Philadelphians in the election in 1860 who are going through these political machinations, these epiphanies. So Boker, who voted for Buchanan in 1856, voted for Lincoln in 1860. All right? So things are changing. All right? At least even in Philadelphia's upper class, if you will, to which John Ennis Clark Hare also belonged. His father was a chemist at the University of Pennsylvania, probably the greatest chemist in the country in the first quarter of the 19th century. Hare would become a lawyer and one of the greatest jurists in Philadelphia when Philadelphia was the center of jurisprudence in the country in the 19th century. And Hare plays an important role, and we'll get to that in just a minute, because he, in a sense, without Hare, there would not have been a Union League in so many ways. So next slide, please, John. This is the board of directors of the Philadelphia Club in 1860. These names may or may not mean anything to you, but like James Marqueux, Harry McCall, William B. Norris. Norris is an old fountain. Think of Norris Square. William Page, George H. Boker, Alexander Wilcox, and William Schott. So there's Boker, third from the right, cigar in his mouth. He loved his cigars. So Boker's entrenched in old Philadelphia and in the Philadelphia Club itself. Next slide, please, John. So Boker, who was a literary man, became the first secretary of the League. And Boker was a convert to something. And I think we've all seen enough figures in history that when you convert to something, you tend to embrace it twice as much as everybody else does. And so Boker embraced his new politics. He embraced his new political party, and he embraced the struggle that this party is now going through. So let's read this, okay? At no period in the struggle was the patriotic spirit so low, or the spirit of the traitors so insultingly hopeful. Our secret foes had emerged from their seclusion, taking their wonted social places, and boasting to their foreign visitors that in what was called unmixed society, they ordered matters, and that all gentlemen would soon be of their way of thinking. Club life reached a state of disruption. Other social assemblies were nothing more than a, quote, a nice meeting of traitors led by that jackal, Charles Ingersoll, okay? So you can see how Boker has gone from one end over to the other end. And Boker would become the heart and soul of the Union League. I mean, he would become its mouthpiece, if you will, okay? All right, next slide, please, John. Benjamin Gerhard, a founding member of the Union League, lived at 226 South 4th Street, and his house is still there. This is where the first meeting took place on November the 15th. So Boker and Hare are walking down 7th Street towards the offices of Morton McMichael, who then was a newspaper publisher, the Philadelphia North American. And they're just talking about how, and this is the fall, this is October of 1863. So the war has not gone well. Philadelphia is the hotbed of Confederate sympathy. The city itself is just in turmoil, and they're going like, what can we do to stop it? And so they go to Morton McMichael and they said, let's create this patriotic society. Let's do something that we can do together, like-minded gentlemen like us, and see if we can start counteracting all this negative Confederate influence in the city of Philadelphia. And so they had their first meeting at the home of Benjamin Gerhard, who was one of the city's leading lawyers at the time, and an elder in the Presbyterian Church, and therefore well respected in the city of Philadelphia. So if you're ever going down South 4th Street, you should stop by and genuflect or throw some holy water, because it was an important building, and it's still there. So next, please, John. And here's George Boker's home. He's the right half of the brownstone, 1720 Walnut Street. Obviously, it's long gone. But this is where the second meeting took place on November the 22nd, and it was here that these men selected the title of the Union Club of Philadelphia. Okay? They started with 15 members at Gerhardt's house. Now they've got 20, 25. They're becoming a bigger mass of people, and they now have a name because that gives them an identity. All right? So that's George Boker and his house. And now we come to the next slide, the home of Dr. John Forsyth Meggs, whose father-in-law, is the most strident anti-unionist in the city of Philadelphia. And this is his house at 1208 Walnut Street. The address is still there, but the building is long gone. But it was here on the night of December 27th of 1862 that the Union League, as we know it, coalesced and organized. So that night, they wrote and they approved Articles of Association, and that would be the next slide, please, John. All right, this is, so surprisingly, we have the original handwritten document on which the Union League was founded on December 27th of 1862, despite the fire that we had in September of 1866, where we lost a lot of our other records. So this is the handwritten Articles of Association. And look in the second paragraph. I'll see if I can read it. Basically, it says, qualifications for membership are unqualified loyalty to the United States of America and unwavering support of the, and they cut it out. So what words do you think they cut out? Unwavering support of the, take a guess. No? Think more politically? Republican Party. Because the gentleman who wrote this was Charles Gibbons, who was the founder of the Republican Party in Philadelphia in 1854 and a founding member of the Union League. And so his concept was that this would be a political club, basically. Next slide, please, John. This gentleman stands up and says, "Not for me, not for me. I am not for any Republican president. I am for the Union." And with that, all hell breaks loose. Think about it, okay? And why not? Because most of the men present there were Republicans, and they dominated the conversation about slavery and abolitionism and things like that. So Doherty had a couple of demographic faults, shall we say. You can tell by his surname, he's Catholic. He's Irish, and he happened to be an Irish Catholic. He was also a lawyer, and he was the city's greatest orator at the time. He was the most respected Catholic citizen in the city of Philadelphia. So when he said something like that, you had to listen to him. And so John Hare, who was president of the night, said, calm the water. He says, gentlemen, I think Mr. Doherty is right. If we're going to be nothing more than just a political club or a political institution, this isn't going to succeed because we need everybody. We need Republicans, we need Democrats, we need nativists, we need everybody to support what we're going to do with this club in the future. Because without that kind of support, we're not going to last. And with that, Doherty made his point, and so they cut the words Republican Club out of the Articles of Association. Okay? So the League in its beginning then was let's call it a bipartisan organization, but at its core it was a patriotic society. And that's what it was. So thanks to Mr. Doherty and Mr. Hare, the day was saved. Now, what's the reaction in Philadelphia among the Democrats? Here we go. They formed something called the Central Democratic Committee on January the 8th. Okay, that's a little more than a week after the Union League is organized, and this is their preamble. That in the state of Pennsylvania, all power is inherent in the white people, capitalized, and that our government is founded on their authority, and that they have at all times the inalienable and indefeasible right to alter, reform, and abolish their government in such manner as they think proper. Pretty strong words. That's basically anarchism. If you think you can abolish a government because you don't like what's going on, that's anarchy. So that's how the Democrats in the city reacted to the founding of the Union League of Philadelphia. They went off the deep end. They really, really did. Okay? In the meantime, back on the ranch, this is the first clubhouse for the Union League of Philadelphia, 1118 Chestnut Street. The building, and regretfully, was torn down in the early 20th century. The home of Hartman Kuhn, Kuhn, an old Philadelphia German family. Keep in mind that Philadelphia was the destination point for German immigrants from Germany in the very beginning of the 18th century. It's not surprising there. So this was the first clubhouse of the Union League of Philadelphia, and they opened it on February the 23rd of 1863. And it stayed that way until the Broad Street building opened. Well, actually, there's one little blip, but 1216 Chestnut Street. So this was the first of the three that we can talk about. But that's where we were located at that point in time. So next slide, please, John. So 6 months later, so the Union League was organized December 27th. On June 27th, the Philadelphia Evening Journal ran a front page article. You can kind of see it here. You can see Evening Journal kind of in the center of your slide there. Okay. All right. And next slide. Okay, so you can see on the right-hand side, those are the names and addresses and occupations of every Union League member at that point in time. Because in the 19th century, newspapers were politically affiliated. So the Evening Journal was a Democratic newspaper. All right, shouldn't be a surprise. Next slide, please, John. Okay, so here we go. Abolition leagues. Okay. Okay. Oh, I can't read the first word, but the self-effaced loyal leagues have completely showed their hand. And basically they're saying that, I mean, this is basically an abolition league. This is an anti-slavery league. This is a league that's going to elevate the black man in this city to a height he has never seen before, and they were completely against that. So here we have a list of Union League members so that you could identify them by where they lived and their occupation, and you knew how wealthy they were. And it also gave you a chance, which they were encouraged to do, was why don't you go out and harass these guys? Show them how you really feel. And if a brick happened to go through the front window, so be it. So the founding members had courage, and they had a lot of courage because it took a lot of courage to do what they were doing in this kind of an environment. It really, really did. So we owe them an incredible debt of gratitude for their strength and their willpower to toe the line, what they did. So it was not an easy beginning, to put it that way, if you will. Okay, but in the meantime, though, some members are doing some wonderful things because the war is on. You have to win it, and that would take money. So John, next slide, please. All right, so Jay Cook from Sandusky, Ohio, an immigrant to Philadelphia. Technically a banker, but he was more of an entrepreneur, I think. But he was the right man in the right time and in the right place, because without Jay Cook, it's very likely that the government would have raised the money to fight the war. The government was having a hard time selling its bonds. They were 6% bonds. They should have been selling. They were called in after 20 years, and they weren't doing anything. So Cook creates this, how do we put it, this legion of salesmen who literally went out throughout the entire country and just door to door started selling these bonds. And by the end of the war, Jay Cook's company sold $1.4 billion of bonds, and those are 1860s dollars. Okay? Yeah, exactly. That's breathtaking, isn't it? It really, really is. Well, at this point, the government is burning $1 million a day to fight a war. Nobody was prepared for the war. And the company, and of course, there was no uniform banking system yet. That was going to come down the line, but it's not there yet. So the government really relied on Jay Cook to raise this money. So in a lot of ways, I think we can say that even though New York was the financial and commercial center of the country at this point in time, Philadelphia did more than its fair share of supporting the war effort financially, and mainly because of Anthony J. Drexel. You know, entrepreneurs tend to be maybe, at least back then, a little, you know, they're kind of like snake oil salesmen perhaps in some ways, and so they didn't have a lot of credibility at times, and Cook didn't have his either. But A.J. Drexel was the most respected banker in the country. He was so well respected that Junius Pierpont Morgan, the father of J.P., made A.J. Drexel his son's mentor in banking. So our J.P. Morgan that we know learned everything he knew at the feet of A.J. Drexel. So A.J. Drexel had that kind of gravitas, he had that kind of credibility, that if he said it was good to buy a bond from Jay Cook, then it was good to buy a bond. And without that confirmation, though, from Drexel, Cook would not have been that successful. In the meantime, the country started the war without a national banking system. thanks to Andrew Jackson, when he basically dissolved the National Bank, the second bank of the United States in 1837. He would not renew its charter. So now you have state banks, you have different kinds of specie all over the place, you have gold and silver backing it. It's very disorganized. But the government is now, as I say, going through $1 million a day. They need a better financial system than relying on what was there. And so in 1862 and 1863, the Congress passed two banking acts, the first of which reorganized a national banking system. And the goal there was to print a single national currency that we would become known as greenbacks. And so Clarence Clark was the other old banking family in Philadelphia. They were from Providence, Rhode Island, by way of Boston. His father, Enoch Clark, started the firm. Clarence Clark is a founding member of the Union League, signed the Articles of Association, and he, like Drexel, was one of the most respected bankers in the country. So he became the president of the first literally the first national bank in the United States was in Philadelphia. The building itself is here. It's on Chestnut between 3rd and 4th, although this didn't open until 1866. But still, it was in that was the banking. The 3rd and Chestnut was the commercial center of Philadelphia. And so Clarence Clark personally signed the first greenback issued by any bank in this country on July the 4th of 1864. So Clark, again, another incredibly important banker in Philadelphia. So this is in some ways, I think Philadelphia then financed the war. You need soldiers to fight a war. And so the Union League had a military committee that, through the course of the war, combined would raise 20,000 soldiers to fight. So this is this is a broadside to raise one of the 90-day wonders, they call them. It was a 3-month regiment. And once they started recruiting, they recruited throughout the entire war itself. In the meantime, you have Frederick Douglass, who was urging the government to let black men fight for their citizenship, because at this point they're not even citizens yet, right? And so in Philadelphia, there was this great movement to promote recruitment among the black citizens, and the military committee would create a subcommittee called the Supervisory Committee for the Some Colored Troops, and we've seen that shortly. So here we had 9 white regiments. The 213th, 14th, and 15th were the last 3 regiments called up in the Civil War itself. They never actually saw combat, mostly guard duty and things like that as the war was winding down. But in the next slide, we'll see the only League member who lost his life in uniform during the war, Charles Izard McEwen. And the Izards and McEwens, just to reinforce the story, were both South Carolina and Virginia plantation families who had moved to Philadelphia. All right, Charles Izard joined the Union League when he was 24 years old in 1863. He became the secretary of the Board of Publication, but he wasn't happy just sitting in his office or at his home, and so he joined the 6th Union League Regiment, or the 198th Pennsylvania. And he would rise to the rank of major. So in the Civil War Regiment, there was a colonel and then 2 majors. He was one of the 2 majors. Battle of Lewis Farm, March 29th of 1865, he would lose his life just 10 days before the war ended. So he was truly a martyr to the cause. And if you go to the Union League and the 15th Street stairwell, you will see this portrait of him hanging on the wall. So Union League members, eventually 321 members would serve in any capacity on behalf of the Union during the war itself. Next slide, please, John. So here we have 1210 Chestnut Street. And this building was rented by the League to serve as the headquarters for the Supervisory Committee. And so, yes, those are black soldiers you see standing on the sidewalk in front, and they are actually armed. The great fear in the city is that if you gave a black man a gun, he'd use it for the wrong reasons. So there's a lot of conflict at this point in time and whatnot. So, but nonetheless, though, this is what the League was doing, and this committee would eventually raise 11 regiments. So, 1,000 men to a regiment, so 9,000 white soldiers, 11,000 black soldiers. And John, next slide, please. The Union League also built the first training camp for black soldiers in American military history, called Camp William Penn. It was located in Cheltenham Township. If you go straight up Broad Street, make a slight left and make a right, and that's where Camp William Penn was located. So the ground is there, but not the camp itself. And the camp itself was ironically designed by a Union League member, who was the architect of Philadelphia City Hall. All right, senior moment number 2. John MacArthur Jr., okay? And he would go on to design City Hall as his greatest building and greatest contribution to Philadelphia architecture. So anyway, so that's Camp William Penn, and you can see how disciplined those men were in line up there. Battle of Newmarket Heights, September 28th, 1864. The 6th USCT Regiment, also trained at Camp William Penn, saw the most action of any of those 11 regiments. And this painting will soon be rehung in the Broad Street hallway. The hallway is just painted, so the paintings are off the wall. Don Troiani, the greatest Civil War artist and living artist in America right now. This is a moment in the war when the 6th had assaulted the Texas Brigade's flanks. And in the Civil War, you've all heard of the game Capture the Flag? All right. So in the Civil War, you try to capture your enemy's flags, because if you did, that was considered the greatest dishonor a regiment could have, was if the enemy got your flags. They were called colors. But in this case, which is why when a battle began and the color guard is marching in the front, they were the first soldiers shot at so that you could capture their flags. And so at this point, the color guard's on the ground, and these 3 officers, Thomas Hankins, Master Sergeant left, Nathan Edgerton, Lieutenant and Adjutant in the center, and then Alexander Kelly on the right, Staff Sergeant, picked up the colors and kept them from being captured by the Texas Brigade. And for that, those 3 officers received the Medal of Honor, hence the title of the painting, 3 Medals of Honor. Phenomenal painting, phenomenal moment in Civil War history, and especially when it comes to the USCT regiments and the war itself. Next, please, John. All right. So they still need money to fight the war, especially to buy medical supplies. Nobody had a supply of them. And so the U.S. Sanitary Commission was created very early in the war as a volunteer organization. Their mission was to raise money to buy the medical supplies for the Army and the Navy. And they discovered, not surprisingly, that people spent more money when they were enjoying themselves. And so they created these Sanitary Commission fairs. So Philadelphia's Fair, you might recognize that building in the background. That is the recently opened Cathedral St. Peter and Paul on Logan Square. This is the fair itself, 200,000 square feet. And underneath those giant tents, they sold everything under the sun. They sold fresh flowers, fish, dairy products. They sold cannons, rifles. They sold collars. They sold gutta-percha golf balls. There wasn't anything they didn't sell, all right? And by the end of the 3 weeks, they had raised $1.1 million. And again, in 1864 dollars. It was the second most successful fair in the country. Only New York raised more money, but only $100,000 more. But this fair would not have taken place without the Union League of Philadelphia, because the Philadelphia chapter of the Sanitary Commission was made up almost entirely of Union League members. And so in February of 1863, the board proposed to the Sanitary Commission, 1864, I beg your pardon, I had my years mixed up, that they hold a fair in Philadelphia. And so the fair is basically run by members of the Union League itself. And it was a great success. So you can see how the League is doing many different kinds of things to support the war effort. Wars need propaganda, right? And in the 19th century, you had the printed word. That meant pamphlets. Think of the Federalist Papers and things like that from the Revolutionary War period. So here we have a sample of some pamphlets that were published by the board. By the end of the war, the League had published over 2 million pamphlets. They were distributed north, south, and west, because one of the great myths, I think, that come out of the Civil War is that if you live north of the Mason-Dixon line, you're automatically pro-Union and pro-Lincoln. If you live south of it, you're pro-Confederate, pro-slavery, but that wasn't the way it was. There were many pro-Confederates as far north as Maine. And after all, keep in mind that West Virginia seceded from Virginia as an anti-slavery, pro-Union state in 1863. So there were anti-slavery movements in the South itself. And so the League was sending these pamphlets into the Deep South as well. Next slide, please, John. The one on the right, the Planner's Almanac. The League had some pretty sharp guys doing these pamphlets. And so the Union Army was giving a bounty to a Confederate soldier if they would cross a Union picket line. And they would become, and they were given complete amnesty. But how do you convince the soldier to do that? So this pamphlet, in the disguise of a Farmer's Almanac, you open up, and there's a speech from Alexander Stephens, the Vice President of the Confederacy. Ours is the greater cause. Next page over is Lincoln's speech encouraging Confederate soldiers to abandon ship, if you will. And then the next page over is a tear-out coupon, basically, that you handed to a Union picket, and that was your amnesty. That was your pass to amnesty. And it worked very, very well. So a great number, we don't have an exact number, but thousands of Confederate soldiers were encouraged to come to the right side, the right cause, if you will, because of this. So this is how these men were using their creativity, their intelligence to support the cause. And here we go. So while all this is going on, the League is also building a new clubhouse because the Hartman-Kuhn Mansion wasn't going to do the job. The ground was purchased in January of 1864. They broke ground in March of 1864, and this was the result, the Broad Street Clubhouse as we know it. And it's the only surviving building in the city built during the war that was meant to be a permanent. Most buildings were meant to be temporary, but this is it. John Fraser, architect, Second Empire style. We all know and love the building dearly, and made the front page of the bulletin on May the 15th of 1865. So, and of course, one of the great what-ifs in Union League history is that Lincoln came to Philadelphia on June 16th of 1864 to visit the Great Central Fair. He had dinner at the League House at 1118 Chestnut Street. He was invited back to be the guest of honor at the dedication of this building, which is under construction, and he said, of course, I'll come back. Unfortunately, there were a few construction delays towards the end of the project, and they postponed the opening from March until May. And Abraham Lincoln went to Ford's Theater on Good Friday, April the 14th, and that was that. So there you go. So back to George Boker. All right. Again, he is the heart and soul of the League, and this is what he wrote in the 1865 annual report. And I would encourage you to read them. They're available. They are masterpieces of literature beyond just being annual reports. So here we go. Let us not therefore suppose that our public annals are closed and that the Union League may degenerate into a mere social club with no higher aims in view than the enjoyment of our hard-won ease. It would be a shame to our proud record and a justification of the slanders of our opponents to admit that the patriotic men of the League have, in these latter days, sunk into a congregation of insipid idlers and nerveless pleasure seekers. So here is George Boker, throwing the gauntlet at every member of the League. Don't forget what we just did, okay? We did something really big, something really important, and that's what we should be building on. So I will let you decide if the League still does that today, all right? What do you think?
Yes.
Well, yes. What's the League's motto? Love of country leads, okay? There you go. That's all we need to know, right? Okay. So on that note, I think I've said enough. So thank you all for coming down and listening. I hope you enjoyed it.
Jim,
Did that work?
that was fantastic. Thank you, Jim. We have time for just a couple of quick questions with quick answers. Yes, in the back.
Knew I talked too much.
John, thank you, and Jim, awesome speech as usual. Dan Fitzpatrick did not ask me to ask this question. The backdrop of Philadelphia being such anti-black, we all know baseball in Philadelphia was very slow to accept that. And one of my favorite players growing up was Dick Allen. So any connection between...
Well,
you can finish the thought.
let's say it. I mean, okay, the Philadelphia Phillies were the last Major League Baseball team to integrate. The last. I mean, that alone should tell you something about Philadelphia 100 years after the Civil War. Okay? Things didn't change, did they? So.
Another question?
Good reference.
Yes, Rich.
Thanks. Hey, Jim. The Dougherty era, when he insisted on bipartisanship,
Yep.
was that issue opened up again later in the century to exclude Democrats at the time?
So what happened is that in the American presidential election of 1892, Grover Cleveland won election for the second time, non-consecutive terms. He was the Democrat. But he was a Democrat and a Republican. He had one foot in one camp and some, and I'm overgeneralizing, I'm sure, but he was a man who pulled from both parties for his administration, and that upset the old guard at the League. I mean, it really did. And so in 1893, they tried to insert the words Republican Club in the bylaws, and luckily, at the time, they missed their deadline to get them to have a special meeting of the membership, so they had to wait for that to happen. And when they did, though, they had the special meeting of the membership, and the members declined to do that. But it's at that point in time that you begin to see this requirement for membership where you were expected to vote for Republicans only in American presidential elections. Because the Republican Party and Philadelphia, Philadelphia was becoming a Republican city itself. It had, 1858 elected its first Republican mayor, Alexander Henry, and there will be only 2 Democratic mayors until 1952, and those 2 Democrats only got elected because the Democrats cut their top row offices and the Republicans did, and gave the election to the Democrats. So Philadelphia was a Republican town already by this point in time. So the League is going to reflect the environment in which it operates. So at this point in time, then the League is going to make its first real turn away from the compromise of 1862 with Doherty and Hare. And now the League is on a path to become a political club, for lack of a better way. Okay?
Time for one last question. Do we have a last question? Yes, Mr. Dunnigan.
Comment, if you would, on the growth of union leagues across the country during the war.
Sure.
And what happened afterwards.
Jim, good point. Thank you. I meant to bring that up earlier. It only takes one person to get something going. In this case, it only takes one club to get something going. And so our compatriots in New York founded their union league in February of 1863, and that began the momentum. And what the League also began to do at the same time was they would create these marketing packets. We already saw how they're pretty good at this kind of stuff, and they would mail them out to every borough and township in the country. As many as they could. And it said, this is what we've done in Philadelphia. This is what we just did in New York. These are our Art Association. This is what you can do in your hometown as well. And so by the end of the Civil War, there were 700 union leagues. And again, as far north as Maine, there were a number in the south, and they went as far west as San Francisco. So yes, and actually George Boker was quoted as saying that if the League had accomplished nothing else in the war than creating 700 union leagues, then that alone justified its existence and the founding of it. So Jim, good question. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking Jim Mundy.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for being with us today. We'll see you at the League House on September 11th with Jane Kaminsky, Jefferson Adams, and the Lost Art of Civic Friendship. Thank you very much. Have a great evening. And if you can, please... Oh, what happened to our... You're going to get an email tomorrow. Please let us know what you think about this program. Give us some suggestions. Thank you very much. Good night.
Yeah, everybody.